Hi there everyone, and welcome to another episode of Uncanny, where we take a look at comic books and all things good that come with them. Now, since tomorrow is Halloween, I thought I would take a quick but special look at some comic book monsters. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of horror in the world. I don't like slasher flicks. They've just never appealed to me. I definitely don't like the torture movies. Some monster movies, though, I do enjoy. And monster movies have been a staple of the horror genre for decades. They've been a staple of literature for over a century. Look back at Bram Stoker's Dracula, look at Frankenstein, and from there the list goes on and on. The Wolfman, the Invisible Man. There are a lot of things. Now, there has been a translation of monsters into comic books. Some might not first appear to be very monstrous, and some might be so monstrous that they're not even monsters. I mean, let's face it, some of the scariest characters in comics are humans. Those aren't the types of monsters I want to look at. I want to look at the full-fledged monsters. So I've got a list here that I want to go through just really quickly. I'm not going to go into some sort of detailed description. I'm not doing a top 5. I just want to talk about some of my favorites and one area that gets a little abused. Now, the first one I want to talk is the classic, and that is any character from Tales from the Crypt. Now, Tales from the Crypt, originally a comic put out by EC Comics. It was shut down by some senatorial hearings saying it was unfit for children. The Comics Code was enacted. Bye-bye EC Comics. Now, Tales from the Crypt also became a TV show in the late 80s, early 90s. And it was actually pretty decent for a horror show. But you had things like the Crypt Keeper, you had zombies, you had your classic kind of movie monsters. And they were done in a very classic way. It was not stretching that trope, if you will. It's not taking the idea of the movie monster and switching them up. It was, let's tell this story and let's make it as terrifying as possible. Now, the second one that kind of goes along with that is Man-Bat. And I'm going to say this, Man-Bat and Solomon Grundy, because they are DC's two big monsters. Both villains. Man-Bat being a man who is ingested who is injected with bat DNA. It's comics. I don't know. And becomes sorry. A Man-Bat being a man who is injected with bat DNA or something like that. It's comics. Becomes as smart as a bat, which means less smart than a human. Vicious for some reason. Can fly. He's got wings covered in hair. His face is very bat-like, and behaves in a lot of a pack mentality. They become men-bat or man-bats, people bats. Becomes a bane for Batman because Batman's got to keep them under control. He's got to try to cure them. And there's a lot of hassle going along with it. But what it is, it's the basic story of what if the idea of Batman is carried to the end? What if he truly embraces the darkness? What if he becomes this inhuman monster that some of the public likes to think of him as, and he becomes a monster? Solomon Grundy, on the other hand, is a man who was a criminal, who was on the run, who died and sank into a magical swamp, and he came back as, let's face it, he's a zombie. Now, he's a big, burly zombie who is very good at destruction and has a mad-on for the Justice Society of America. But he's a zombie. I mean, he doesn't eat flesh for some reason. But that's what he is. He's undead. And you kill him and he comes back. Now, the cool thing about Grundy is that each time he comes back, or pre-New 52, every time he came back, he would have somewhat of a different personality. He might be smart, he might be kind, he might even be a hero. But something would always happen, he'd die, and he'd come back, and he'd always come back worse than ever. So it was an interesting way for authors, for writers to tweak that character, to keep it fresh. Now, moving over to the other side, being Marvel Comics, I've got a couple. One is Morbius the Living Vampire, who is a villain, an anti-hero, sometimes a little bit of both. But Morbius is a character that's always confused me, because he's definitely an analog to Dracula. You know, he's even got a lot of that same look. But depending on the writer, his vampirism is either true vampirism, just like in the movies, or, you know, his bites don't infect people and turn them into vampires. It gets confusing. But, you know, he's a classic movie monster made fairly original. The other one from Marvel is Fin Fang Foom. He's a giant dragon wearing purple pants. What more can you say? Purple underpants, too. I love Fin Fang Foom. He's almost completely a ridiculous character, and I've never really seen him made to be the vicious giant monster that he really should be. But it's kind of nice. He's kind of comedic relief in a way. He's not meant to be, but the stories never seem to be horribly serious. Maybe because most of the stories that came with him were in the 60s, and then every subsequent story wanted to keep that feel. So they were lighter stories with a giant raging monster who could probably rip Godzilla apart in them. Because let's face it, Godzilla's the fat kid on the block when it comes to monsters. He's cool, but he's the fat kid. Alright, the last major comic book monster I want to talk about is Violator. Now, Violator is a character from Spawn, who you might even consider a monster in and of himself, but he is a demon whose sole goal in unlife, afterlife, whatever you want to call it, is to hunt down Al Simmons and take his soul back to hell. He has a humanesque form of a clown, and he's simply known as the Clown when he's like that. But he's this creepy, super fat, disgusting, like, just terrifying looking clown. I'm sorry. But between him and Pennywise, I still might take Pennywise. And if you don't know what Pennywise is, look it up. In demon form, he's this gross, terrifying, almost insectoid-like creature. Kind of similar, I don't know why, but it reminds me of the aliens from Starship Troopers, the movie. It's got manned, like, really long arms and claws and almost a scorpion's tail. But then his body and face are really chunky and sharp, and it's gross. And it's definitely a demon horror genre. But just about everything from Spawn is. Now, the very last thing I want to talk about when it comes to comic book monsters is when they're done wrong. And I'm specifically looking at movie monsters put into comics. Because either they're A, completely unoriginal and just retelling the same old hash, or B, they're meant to be new and exciting and you get some funky changes. Now, one of the only ones where I really feel like this works is Werewolf by Night. It's a classic story. It's a werewolf story. It takes place in the modern Marvel universe, but you get some really good insights into the character of the human that becomes the werewolf. And honestly, that's how you have to do a movie monster into comics. Dracula, The Company of Men by Boom Studios is one of those comics where you've got Dracula. You get the mythology of Dracula. It's set in the modern world, though, and you get some twists and turns along the way, but they don't betray the character. Now, there are plenty of characters that do have this betrayal. Frankenstein. Just about every time they do Frankenstein in the comics, I can't stand it. Even if it's, really popular, like the Frankenstein that came out of Seven Soldiers of Victory from DC. Whether it's I Frankenstein or there's I Vampire. Apple must have bought stock in DC. You've got things like Capwolf, or Captain America's turned into a werewolf. So it's just, you got a lot of things like that. You get a lot of Creature from the Blue Lagoons, mummies, zombies, over and over and over again, and it's overdone, and it just doesn't seem to work quite right. But you do have a lot of good monsters out there, and I've just scraped the surface. Go look up comic book monsters, look up movie monsters. Tomorrow's Halloween, dress up as one. I've dressed up as a zombie before. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I also dressed up as Tony Stark last year, so go there. So, enjoy your guys' Halloween. Have fun with it. And until next time, this is Baka, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.